Buenas tardes, good afternoon. Primero que nada, quisiera pedirles disculparme que voy a seguir en inglés. Yo creo que me suena un poco más inteligente en inglés que español. ¿Ya? ¿Está bien? Bueno. Secondly, I'd like to thank IIeX for hosting this event, for giving us an opportunity to open up our brains, open up ourselves, and to explore a little bit more of each other, of our community, and of our industry and our professions. Today I'm going to present on from the bottom of the pyramid to the emerging middle class. It's a presentation written by Sarah Bomfrey, head of our countries and consumers. I know there are a few people in the audience who heard the same topic last week, but I think it's such an important one that it's worth hearing again. And if there's anything that I can plant with you today, is that the base of the pyramid and the emerging middle class is an important topic for every organization, for every government, for every research house, and for every company, particularly in Latin America. There's a tremendous opportunity here. And today, all the figures we're going to see today are from 2013. And when I talk about Latin America, I talk about 13 countries for which we have reliable research. And that represents about 90% of the households in Latin America. And Latin America is a region made up of 611 million people. And it's a consumer market worth $3.6 trillion. That's the same size as China. But in Latin America, Latin Americans per capita spend double the Chinese. And some of the reasons for this is the economic stability in the region, the proximity to the US marketplace, a resource-rich environment, and a young population. But with great opportunities also comes a lot of challenges. And we look at the household disposable income across 85 countries around the world. We rank it in the Gini index, where 0 is perfect equality and 1 is perfect inequality. 5 of the 10 most unequal economies in the world are in this region, in Latin America. And 12 of the 13 that we study fall in the bottom 50%. And Chile, the least unequal of these markets, ranks 47 out of 85 economies around the world. So with such great inequality, there is a tremendous opportunity at the base of the pyramid. And so when we talk about the base of the pyramid, I'm talking about households that have less than $5,000 disposable income and $10,000 disposable income. And there are 36.4 million households in Latin America that have below $5,000 in disposable income. And that is the same size as 2 Spains. And there are 64.1 million households with less than $10,000 disposable income, and that's the same size as Indonesia, or half of the number of households of the United States. So taken as a whole, the base of the pyramid is a tremendous market, a tremendous segment in Latin America. And when I talk about the base of the pyramid, I'm thinking about Decile 1 out of 10, where Decile 1 is the lowest earning 10% of a country. And this market is worth $77 billion. And we know that 66% of that goes towards essential items, housing and food. And that leaves another $28 billion for non-essentials, which we take a look at the graph. That takes a look at the cumulative spend across Latin America that consumers in Decile 1 spend in 2013. But that big number masks a number of differences across the region. When you take a look at the different economies of a Decile 1 household, in Venezuela we can see they have access to different durables, different household infrastructure, things that we take for granted sometimes, like refrigerators, mobile phones, tablets. And we can see in Venezuela that 90% of the households in Decile 1 have refrigeration. And if we go to the other extreme and look at places like Bolivia, we can see a Decile 1 household has less than 2% penetration of refrigerators. And that creates tremendous challenges for us as market researchers, and as well as us on the corporate side trying to market to these consumers and fill those needs. And there are a number of different cases of success for the base of the pyramid. And today I'm going to talk about one, Promisador in Africa. They have a powdered milk brand called Cowbell. Now, Promisador works in an environment where oftentimes these households do not have running water, electricity, plumbing. As we saw some of the presentation yesterday from Laura and AJ, we saw some of the pictures of the households in the favelas de Rio de Janeiro. And we could see the different infrastructures that they have. And similar in Africa, we have similar challenges, as well as distribution problems and challenges, getting products to these consumers. And what Cowbell has done, the brand Cowbell has done, is they've done two innovations. One is they have removed the milk fat, the animal fat from the milk powder, and they've replaced it with vegetable fat to give it a longer shelf life to be able to distribute to various parts of Africa. The second innovation is they're delivering it in sachets, single-serve sachets, that makes it at a better price point for consumers and much more convenient for consumers, and also allows them to have a little more luxury at home. And that has resulted in a 30% market share in Nigeria, and it translates into about $174 million in sales of milk powder. And this is in a market where UHT milk and fresh milk simply cannot survive, literally and figuratively. Now, in the last 10, 13 years, we've seen a tremendous movement. There are a lot of people who are leaving poverty today in Latin America and moving into this new emerging middle class. It's a tremendous opportunity for us as market researchers and marketers to approach this market in a more sensible way and look at the needs that they have. And if we look, there was a study that came out a couple of years ago by Atzman, released in the McKinsey Quarterly, talking about this emerging middle class in Latin America, or in the United States. And it looked back into 1925 in the US with this fast-growing emerging middle class. And what they found was the companies who were dominant at the time were number one or number two for the rest of the century. So when you think about the opportunities to start to work with this emerging middle class today, fill their needs, work through their generations, help them upsell to new, better products as they progress, as their family progresses, as their children progress, becomes a tremendous opportunity to build a brand, build a category where one doesn't exist today. And when I talk about the emerging middle class, it's pretty difficult to define who is an emerging middle class when you look at the number of different countries around the world. So for today's purposes, we're going to look at the emerging middle class as households that have an income between $10,000 and $45,000. And we can see in the graph, and just simply in the last 13 years, we've had tremendous growth in this emerging middle class. Today, there are 87 million households in Latin America, and 60% of them are within our two largest economies in the region, Mexico and Brazil. And so as I take a look, we're going to take a look at Mexico briefly. And Mexico is a country with 30 million households today, with an average household size of 4 people per household and an average disposable income of $29,500. And in just the middle of the next decade, we're expecting to see 8 million more households with a shrinking household size and 24% increase in household disposable incomes. So in Mexico, in the next 11 years, we expect to see 9.5 million emerging middle class households. A tremendous opportunity here. And as we talked about in the base of the pyramid, looking at these big regional numbers also masks all the differences between the countries. And so far we've talked about emerging middle classes having an income between $10,000 and $45,000. We're going to now take a look at a Decile 5 household, middle earning of a country. And you can see tremendous differences across the countries. Between Chile, who has an average disposable income at a Decile 5 household of $22,500, and that's 5 times more than the same household, average household Decile 5 in Bolivia. And there was a World Bank study that came out a few years ago that talked about this emerging middle class in Latin America. And one of the things that they found was that there are some similarities in the emerging middle class across the region. They tend to be urban. They tend to have smaller than average household sizes. And they tend to have working females in the households. But that's where the differences stop, or the similarities stop. And there are more differences than similarities across the region. And this World Bank report further went on to say that the emerging middle class in their country has more in common with the poor in their country than with the emerging middle class in the region. I'll think about that. That's kind of a no-duh statement of, yeah, that makes sense. The emerging middle class has more in common with the poor of their own country than the emerging middle class of other countries. And a lot of the times we try to do a one-size-fits-all approach and have a similar strategy for this emerging middle class. And that's not a very good recipe for success. And when we take a look at what the average decile 5 household spends on, we've got 3 examples up here, Brazil, Chile, and Mexico, looking at the average across Latin America. And we could see wide disparities in these different marketplaces. Even looking at the average, you can see the two biggest bars, which are foods and household spend, are different across these 3 countries. And things like transport also is widely different across countries. Even communication spend per household is different across these countries. And when we look at the possession of certain durables, we can look at the different media. This week, we've been talking about the different screens that we can communicate to our consumers. We talked about television. We talked about mobile phones. We've talked about tablets and computers. And even the access to these different possessions and these different durables in these households is highly variable across this decile 5 household. When we look at something like color TVs, it peaks at 100% in places like Costa Rica and as low as 73% in places like Mexico. And we look at something like mobile telephones, it peaks at near 100% in places like Chile, Colombia, and Bolivia, but as low as 55% in places like Venezuela. And we look at something like internet-enabled computers, we see that it peaks in a decile 5 household at 45% in Uruguay and bottoms out at 3% in places like Bolivia. So when we think about this emerging middle class, this decile 5 household, there's wild differences across the region and different ways that we can communicate, gather information, and market to these different consumers. Now, there are different success stories of approaching the emerging middle class, and IKEA is one of them. IKEA in 2013 had a banner year, and a lot of that was driven by the success in Asia Pacific. And one of the things that IKEA does every single year is they visit households. They visit the households in different parts of the country, and it allows them to go from a global strategy to a local strategy to a much more granular strategy. And what they found in China, specifically, it was in the northern part of China, households use their balconies for food storage, and in the southern part of China, they use their balconies for laundry. And that's allowed them to better equip their stores with the right products for the right consumers. Which brings me around to our forecast and our conclusion. That Latin America, in simply the next 6 years, we're expecting to see a rising emerging middle class that adds 15.8 million more households, leaving poverty and going into a new aspirational consumer. And we expect to see a decrease of 2.8 million households at the base of the pyramid, but that's a market still with 35 million households in the region that want to be aspiring consumers, they want to be aspiring entrepreneurs, and have opportunities and needs that are distinct from everybody in this room. We don't live this way at the base of the pyramid. We don't live as an emerging middle class. And it's important that we are able to get ourselves in their shoes and walk around for a bit to better understand what their needs are. And it's not about making a cheap product or reducing features and giving something that's less than what we give to the upper middle class or the rich of our country. It's about finding their real needs, their real aspirations, and fixing those needs. And there's a tremendous opportunity. So to conclude, it is about the appropriate product at the right price, but it's about understanding that a one-size-fits-all doesn't apply, that the emerging middle class in Guatemala is different than the emerging middle class in Chile, and the base of the pyramid in Brazil is different than the base of the pyramid in Peru. That we have to observe what are the real needs of these particular classes. There are lots of innovations. We've heard lots of insights these last couple of days about different ways we can capture consumer insights. But there's a great challenge here but there's also a great opportunity. If I go back a couple slides, we would see that 74% of the population of Latin America is in this base of the pyramid and in this emerging middle class. Tremendous opportunity for all of us, but it's going to take a lot of work to get there. Thank you.